How much cruelty can a crown command? What terrifying power lay in the hands of women who sat on thrones, sending shivers down the spines of their subjects? From the ancient world to the height of empire, some queens chose the most shocking public displays to silence their enemies and assert their will. Number 10. The Mutilation of Consort Qi by Empress Lü Zhi of China. The halls of the Han Dynasty Palace in ancient China held more than just lavish feasts and intricate court dances. They also held unspeakable acts of cruelty, often at the direct command of Empress Lü Zhi. When Emperor Gaozu, the founder of the Han Dynasty, died in 195 BCE, his powerful widow, Empress Lü, was determined to keep the real power for herself. Her bitterest rival had always been Consort Qi, one of the late emperor's favorite concubines, who had given birth to a son, Lü Zhi, whom the emperor had briefly considered making his heir. Consort Qi was beautiful, clever, and had held a significant place in the emperor's affections. Her very existence and that of her son was a direct threat to Lü Zhi's authority and to the future of her own son, the new Emperor Hui. Empress. Lü Zhi was not a woman to tolerate threats. Her ambition was as vast as the empire she now effectively ruled. As regent, she had endured years of political maneuvering and personal slights. Now, with the emperor gone, she was ready to unleash her pent-up fury. Consort Qi, once revered and protected by the emperor, found herself utterly exposed and vulnerable. Empress Lü's initial move was to imprison Consort Qi, and then summon her son, Lü Zhi, from his principality. The young emperor, Hui, who was known to be soft-hearted, understood his mother's intentions and tried to protect his half-brother. He met Lü Zhi at the gates and stayed with him constantly, sharing meals and sleeping arrangements, hoping to shield him from his mother's wrath. Records from the Shiju, the Grand Scribe's records, recount Emperor Hui's desperate attempts to save his brother, a testament to the chilling dread that Lü Zhi inspired. But Empress Lü Zhi was relentless. One morning, when Emperor Hui briefly left his brother's side, she seized the opportunity. She sent a poisoned drink to Lü Zhi, and he died. With the son dead, the mother's fate was sealed. Consort Qi knew what was coming. The court whispered about Lü Zhi's cold fury. The empress ordered a punishment that would not only eliminate her rival, but also send a terrifying message to anyone who might dare to cross her or challenge her family's supreme power. It was an act designed to humiliate, to terrorize, and to strip away every last vestige of her enemy's humanity. The execution was not a quick, clean death in a public square. Instead, it was a prolonged, horrific process designed to maximize suffering and send a clear, visceral message throughout the palace and beyond. Consort Qi was first forced to wear prison attire, and her head was shaved, stripping her of her former beauty and status. Then came the true horror. Empress Lü Zhi ordered her hands and feet chopped off. Next, her eyes were gouged out and her ears were burned to prevent her from hearing. Finally, a potion was given to her to destroy her vocal cords, rendering her mute. She was then thrown into a pigsty, a latrine, and given the horrifying moniker, human swine. This abominable spectacle was not hidden. Palace officials, courtiers, and even the young Emperor Hui himself were forced to witness the degradation and living torment of Consort Qi. The Shiju explicitly described the young emperor's reaction, stating he fell gravely ill for over a year after seeing the human swine, unable to rule effectively, reportedly saying, "This is not something a human can do. I am my mother's son." The sight and the knowledge of Consort Qi's fate spread through the capital, Chang'an, like a chilling wind. It was a public execution in the most brutal sense, meant to demonstrate the absolute, unchallengeable authority of Empress Lü Zhi. The pigsty was a public exhibition of her power, a terrifying example of what awaited those who dared to stand in her way. The disposal of her mutilated body was a final act of desecration, ensuring no dignified burial or remembrance. The immediate aftermath was a court paralyzed by fear and a young emperor broken by his mother's cruelty. Empress Lü Zhi's reign continued for years, marked by her firm and often ruthless control. But the image of Consort Qi, the human swine, remained a horrifying testament to the depths of her vengeful power. Historical accounts such as those found in Sima Qian Shiju detail this event, ensuring its gruesome memory persisted through the centuries, a dark stain on the history of the Han Dynasty. Number 9. The Fiery End of Thomas Cranmer by Mary I of England. In a kingdom torn by religious strife, where the very faith of its people shifted with the monarch on the throne, the fate of Thomas Cranmer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, became a public spectacle of agonizing proportions. This was England in the mid-16th century, a time when Mary I, fiercely Catholic and determined to reverse the Protestant reforms of her father, Henry VIII, and her half-brother, Edward VI, sat on the throne. Cranmer, a key architect of the English Reformation, had been a close advisor to Henry VIII and had famously annulled Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, paving the way for Anne Boleyn in the establishment of the Church of England. He had also signed the death warrant of Mary's own mother. His very existence and his prominent role in shaping England's Protestant identity was an unforgivable offense in Mary's eyes. Mary, known to history as Bloody Mary by her Protestant detractors, pursued a relentless policy of restoring Roman Catholicism. For her, Cranmer was a symbol of heresy, a man who had betrayed the true faith and led the nation astray. His imprisonment began in 1553, shortly after Mary's ascension. He faced charges of treason for supporting Lady Jane Grey, but more significantly, he was charged with heresy. Cranmer's trial was a drawn-out affair, less about justice and more about breaking his will and forcing him to recant his Protestant beliefs. He was subjected to public debates and theological arguments, all designed to show his intellectual defeat and moral failing. The goal was to force him to publicly confess his errors and affirm Catholic doctrine, a victory that would legitimize Mary's religious purge and demoralize the Protestant cause. Under immense pressure, after nearly 3 years of imprisonment and psychological torment, Cranmer did indeed sign several recantations, progressively renouncing his Protestant views and affirming Catholic teachings. These recantations were seen as a huge triumph for Mary and her Catholic advisors, a testament to the power of their persuasion and the apparent weakness of the Protestant spirit. But the Queen and her advisors, perhaps seeing him as too dangerous to live even after recantation, or perhaps wanting to send an even stronger message, decided his death was still necessary. A recantation might save his soul, in their view, but it would not spare him the flames. Historical accounts, including Fox's Book of Martyrs, described the machinations and a desire to make an example of him. The day of execution arrived on March 21st, 1556, in Oxford. The scene was set for a grand public spectacle designed to awe and terrify. A large crowd had gathered in St. Mary's Church, where Cranmer was to deliver a final sermon and publicly affirm his recantation before being taken to the stake. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. People had traveled from surrounding areas to witness the downfall of such a prominent figure. The air was cold and damp, a fitting backdrop for the somber event. Cranmer, dressed in humble attire, was led to a platform within the church. His appearance was marked by suffering, his face haggard. He began his address, and the crowd held its breath, expecting to hear a final denouncement of Protestantism. Then, in a dramatic and shocking reversal, Cranmer declared that he would, with his own hand that assigned it at the very fire, triumphantly destroy his errors. He repudiated all his recantations, stating that he had signed them out of fear and against his conscience. He declared that the Pope was Christ's enemy and that the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation was false. He stated his hand, which had signed the recantations, would be burned first. This unexpected defiance sent shockwaves through the assembly. The authorities, enraged by his sudden turnaround, quickly pulled him from the pulpit. He was immediately led to the stake which had been prepared in front of Balliol College. The execution site was a stark wooden structure surrounded by bundles of faggots ready to be lit. Crowd, already stunned by his sermon, watched. In a mixture of horror and awe, Cranmer was fastened to the stake. As the flames were lit and began to rise, he calmly stretched out his right hand into the fire, holding it there steadfastly, fulfilling his promise that the hand which had signed the recantations would suffer first. Eyewitness accounts suggest he did not flinch, repeatedly calling out, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." The fire consumed him, and his death was a public testament to his faith and defiance. His martyrdom, meticulously recorded by Protestant chroniclers, became a powerful symbol of resistance against Mary's persecution, deeply impacting the religious landscape of England for generations to come. The Queen's order for his execution, intended to crush Protestantism ironically, served to strengthen its resolve and solidify Cranmer's place as a martyr in the nation's memory. Number 8. The Beheading of Mary, Queen of Scots, by Elizabeth I of England. The relationship between Elizabeth I of England and Mary, Queen of Scots, was a tangled web of cousinly rivalry, religious differences, and dynastic claims that ultimately led to one of history's most dramatic. For decades, Mary, a Catholic, had been viewed by many as the legitimate heir to the English throne, particularly by those who did not recognize the legitimacy of Elizabeth, a Protestant daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Mary's claim was strengthened by her direct descent from Henry VII. Her very existence, especially after she fled Scotland in 1568 following political upheavals and sought refuge in England, became a constant threat to Elizabeth's rule. Mary spent 19 years in various English prisons, a prisoner queen whose presence continually fueled plots and conspiracies aimed at placing her on the English throne. These plots, often backed by Catholic European powers like Spain and France, kept Elizabeth's government in a state of high alert. Elizabeth for a long time resisted executing her cousin, understanding the political ramifications of killing an anointed monarch. However, the discovery of the Babington Plot in 1586, a direct conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne, provided the final undeniable evidence that Mary was an ongoing existential threat. Letters implicating Mary were seized and her secretaries confessed. According to historical records, like those found in the Calendar of State Papers, foreign series of the reign of Elizabeth, the evidence was compelling enough for Elizabeth's Privy Council. Elizabeth's Parliament and her most trusted advisors, notably Sir Francis Walsingham and William Cecil, urged her to sign Mary's death warrant. The pressure on the Queen was immense. She wavered, knowing the precedent such an execution would set for monarchs. But the security of her kingdom and indeed her own life seemed to demand it. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, Elizabeth finally signed the warrant in February 1587, reportedly lamenting the necessity of such an act even as she authorized it. The order was dispatched to Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire, where Mary was imprisoned. The execution was to be a public spectacle, designed not only to eliminate a rival, but also to demonstrate the strength and resolve of the English crown. On February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was led to the scaffold, affotted in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. The hall was filled with witnesses, including members of the Privy Council, local gentry, and Mary's own attendants, though her closest companions were separated from her at the last moment. The atmosphere was somber, but also charged with a tension that had built over decades of political intrigue. Mary, now 44, maintained a regal composure. She was dressed in a black velvet gown, but beneath it she wore a crimson petticoat, the color of Catholic martyrdom, a powerful symbolic statement to those who would witness her death. Accounts from contemporary witnesses, such as those found in the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, the reports of Robert Wingfield and Andreas de Machiere, describe her dignified demeanor. She ascended the scaffold, which was draped in black cloth, revealing the block, the axe, and the two masked executioners. Mary knelt and prayed, then expressed her forgiveness to her executioners, stating she hoped her death would bring peace to the realm. Her final moments were marked by an unflinching display of courage and religious devotion. As she prepared for the blow, she reportedly said, "In your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." She laid her head on the block. The first blow of the axe missed her neck and struck the back of her head. A groan went through the assembled witnesses. The second blow severed her head. One of the executioners picked up her head by the hair, proclaiming, "God save the Queen." But as he did so, Mary's long brown wig came away in his hand, revealing her short gray hair beneath, a stark reminder of her age and suffering. The immediate aftermath was one of stunned silence, followed by the executioners burning her clothes and the blood-soaked materials to prevent relics being taken. Her body was embalmed and then buried in Peterborough Cathedral, though later reinterred by her son James I in Westminster Abbey. Mary's execution, ordered by Elizabeth I, was a shocking and definitive end to a decades-long rivalry. It removed the greatest internal threat to Elizabeth's Protestant reign, but it also sparked international outrage, particularly from Catholic nations. It remained a pivotal moment in English history, a stark example of a queen exercising ultimate authority to protect her throne, even if it meant sacrificing a royal cousin. Number 7. The Drawing and Quartering of Yemelyan Pugachev by Catherine the Great of Russia. The vast Russian Empire in the late 18th century was a land of stark contrasts, where the glittering court of Empress Catherine the Great stood in stark opposition to the harsh realities faced by millions of serfs. This social divide, coupled with a deep resentment towards the nobility, simmered beneath the surface, occasionally erupting into open rebellion. The most significant of these was the Pugachev Rebellion, led by a Minok Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. Pugachev, claiming to be the deceased Emperor Peter III, Catherine's murdered husband, ignited a massive peasant uprising that swept through southeastern Russia from 1773 to 1775. His movement promised freedom from serfdom land and an end to oppressive taxes, attracting a huge following of Cossacks, peasants, and various ethnic minorities. Catherine the Great, a German-born empress who had seized the throne from her husband, was a formidable ruler, a proponent of the Enlightenment, but also a pragmatist with an iron will. The Pugachev Rebellion, which at its peak controlled vast territories and threatened Moscow, was the greatest challenge to her authority during her reign. It was more than a mere peasant revolt. It was a civil war that exposed the fragility of the Russian social order and the deep-seated grievances of its populace. Catherine initially underestimated the rebellion, but soon realized its existential threat. She deployed her best generals and the bulk of her army, eventually suppressing the uprising through overwhelming military force. Records from the collected correspondence of Catherine the Great reveal her anxiety and determination to crush the rebellion. Once the rebellion was effectively put down, Pugachev himself was betrayed by his own Cossack commanders and captured in September 1774. His capture was a monumental victory for Catherine. She understood that his execution needed to be a public, brutal, and utterly uncompromising display of imperial power to deter any future rebellions. It was not enough to simply kill him. His death had to serve as a terrifying object lesson for every peasant and serf who might consider challenging the Romanov dynasty. The decision for his execution was hers alone, a clear signal of her authority and ruthlessness. The procession began on January 10, 1775 in Moscow. The execution site was Bolotnaya Square, a large public space often used for such spectacles. A massive crowd, numbering tens of thousands, had gathered. The anticipation was palpable, a mix of fear, morbid curiosity, and perhaps even some lingering hope among his former followers. Pugachev was brought to the square in an iron cage, drawn by a sleigh, a stark symbol of his broken power. He was accompanied by his closest allies, also condemned to death. Air was cold, the ground covered in snow, adding to the grim atmosphere. As he was taken from the cage, Pugachev reportedly bowed to the people and crossed himself, a final gesture of defiance and piety. Historical accounts, including those from contemporary Russian historians like Vasily Klyuchevsky, provide details of this dramatic public event. The method of execution chosen was drawing and quartering, a medieval form of capital punishment designed for traitors, reserved for the most heinous crimes. It was meant to inflict maximum suffering and humiliation. The process would typically involve disemboweling the condemned, followed by cutting off their limbs. However, Catherine, in a rare act of mercy for the time, reportedly ordered that Pugachev's head and heart be severed before his body was dismembered, to spare him prolonged suffering. This slight modification was perhaps intended to show a veneer of enlightened rule, even amidst the barbarity. Nonetheless, the spectacle was designed to be terrifying. Pugachev was placed on the scaffold, the executioner. A fearsome figure performed the gruesome task swiftly. His head was severed, then his heart, and then his limbs were cut from his torso. The remains of his body and those of his comrades were displayed publicly as a warning, scattered in different parts of the city. The immediate aftermath was one of absolute terror. The crowd witnessing the gruesome display understood the message clearly. The Empress's power was absolute, and rebellion would be met with unspeakable brutality. The roads leading to Moscow were lined with gallows, displaying the bodies of other rebels, further solidifying the message. The Pugachev rebellion was effectively crushed, and with it the hope of immediate peasant liberation. Catherine the Great, through this shocking public execution, reasserted her control and demonstrated her willingness to employ extreme measures to maintain order, a defining moment in her reign and in Russian history. Number 6. The torture and display of Empress Wang and Consort Zhao by Lü Zhi of China. In the 7th century, China was ruled by the Tang dynasty, a period of immense cultural flourishing and political intrigue. At the heart of this intrigue was Wu Zetian, a concubine who, through sheer ambition, intelligence, and ruthless determination, rose to become the only female emperor in China's history. Her path to power was paved with the downfall of rivals, none more prominent and devastating than Empress Wang and Consort Zhao, the primary wife and a favored concubine of Emperor Gaozong, Wu Zetian's husband. Wu Zetian had entered the palace as a low-ranking concubine. She quickly captivated the emperor and began to systematically undermine the positions of Empress Wang and Consort Zhao, both of whom despised her. The palace was a battleground of whispers, accusations, and shifting loyalties. Wu Zetian was a master manipulator. She orchestrated a series of events that implicated the Empress and Consort Qi in various intrigues, even famously accusing Empress Wang of murdering her own infant daughter, a heinous crime which Wu Zetian herself is widely believed to have committed. These accusations, fueled by Wu Zetian's influence over the emperor, slowly eroded the Empress's standing. The emperor, often weak-willed and susceptible to Wu's charms, gradually believed the charges against his empress and his concubine. Historical accounts, such as those in the Zhijitongjin, comprehensive mirror in aid of dominance, detail Wu Zetian's meticulous plotting. By 655 CE, Wu Zetian's power had grown so immense that Emperor Gaozong, against the strong opposition of many powerful ministers, officially deposed Empress Wang and Consort Zhao. Wu Zetian was then elevated to the position of Empress. But for Wu Zetian, merely removing her rivals was not enough. She craved total elimination and absolute vengeance. Her reign as Empress would be marked by an unprecedented level of ruthlessness. The former, Empress and Consort, were imprisoned in the palace, stripped of their titles and privileges. The Emperor, feeling a pang of pity, briefly considered releasing them. This news infuriated Wu Zetian. She knew that as long as they lived, they remained a potential rallying point for her enemies, and a painful reminder of her own humble origins. The order for their execution came directly from Wu Zetian. Swift and horrifying. Though not a public execution in the sense of a town square spectacle, their demise was known throughout the imperial court and served as a chilling public warning to all who witnessed or heard of it. The cruelty of the chosen method was meant to send an undeniable message about Wu Zetian's power and vengeance. Empress Wang and Consort Zhao were first given 100 strokes with a large rod, a severe beating that would have left them severely wounded. But this was only the beginning of their torment. After the beating, Wu Zetian ordered that their hands and feet be chopped off. Then their mutilated bodies were thrown into a large wine vat, or in some accounts, a well or privy, where they slowly drowned or bled to death, reportedly over several days. The Empress is said to have declared that she wanted them to be bones soaking in wine. This utterly barbaric act was designed to be agonizingly painful and profoundly humiliating, utterly stripping them of their human dignity. The details of this horrific punishment were intentionally spread throughout the palace and among the nobility. It was a public display of power through a grotesque act of cruelty. Records suggest that Consort Zhao cursed Wu Zetian with her dying breath, declaring that Wu Zetian would be reincarnated as a cat, and she, Consort Qi, would be reincarnated as a mouse to torment Wu for eternity. This curse haunted Wu Zetian, who later forbade cats from the palace. The immediate aftermath was one of terror and silent submission within the court. No one dared to openly challenge Empress Wu Zetian after such a display of her unbridled power. Emperor Gouzong, already frail and often dominated by Wu Zetian, became even more subservient. The executions of Empress Wang and Consort Zhao were a turning point in Wu Zetian's ascent. They solidified her reputation as a formidable and merciless ruler, willing to commit any atrocity to secure her position. The sheer brutality of their demise made it a shocking public event, remembered through the centuries as a testament to the dark side of absolute power held by a queen. Number 5. The mass execution of Christians by Ranavalona, the first of Madagascar. In the early 19th century, the island nation of Madagascar was ruled by Ranavalona the First, a queen whose reign of 33 years was marked by extreme isolationism, fierce repression of Protestanism. Having ascended to the throne in 1828, Ranavalona aimed to preserve traditional Malagasy customs and the power of the monarchy against the incursions of British and French missionaries, who brought with them not only the Christian faith, but also Western ideas. She saw Christianity as a foreign ideology that undermined ancestral traditions, loyalty to the sovereign, and the authority of the traditional priests. Initially, missionaries had enjoyed some tolerance under her predecessor, King Radama I. However, Ranavalona soon reversed this policy. By 1835, she issued a royal decree banning Christianity and ordering all Malagasy converts to publicly renounce their faith or face severe penalties. This decree, known as the Kabari, was a public announcement delivered in the traditional Malagasy manner, gathering vast numbers of people. It made it clear that the queen considered adherence to the new faith an act of treason, a direct challenge to her supreme authority. Her motivation was not purely religious. It was profoundly political, aimed at shoring up her rule by eliminating any perceived foreign influence and ensuring total obedience to her. Accounts from missionary records, such as those found in Ellis's 3 visits to Madagascar, depict the escalating persecution. Persecution that followed was relentless and widespread, affecting thousands across the island. The executions were not isolated incidents, but a systemic campaign often carried out in public to serve as a stark warning. The methods were varied and horrifying, designed to inflict maximum terror and deter any defiance. Christians were forced to undergo the Tenjina ordeal, where they ingested a poisonous fruit with survival indicating innocence, but often leading to death, and failure leading to execution. Others faced slavery, torture, or direct execution. One of the most shocking and infamous public executions occurred on March 28, 1849, at Faravohitra, a rocky outcrop overlooking the capital, Antananarivo. This particular event involved a large group of Christians who had steadfastly refused to renounce their faith. 4 of them were nobles, and they were sentenced to be burned alive. The remaining 14 commoners were to be thrown from the notoriously steep cliff of Ferravohitra. The site itself was a dramatic stage for the spectacle, chosen for its visibility and the sheer terror it invoked. A huge crowd had gathered to witness the Queen's judgment being carried out. The atmosphere was one of grim anticipation, with the smoke from the ready pyres already visible. The 4 nobles were led to the stakes. Among them was Rizafanarivo, a Christian woman who, despite the horrific fate awaiting her, reportedly maintained her composure. They were bound to the stakes surrounded by dry wood and straw. As the flames were lit, they reportedly sang hymns and prayed, their voices rising above the murmur of the crowd. The smoke and heat consumed them, and their deaths were agonizingly public. Meanwhile, the 14 commoners were led to the edge of the cliff. They too were given a final chance to recant, but they refused. One by one, they were pushed over the precipice, falling to their deaths hundreds of feet below. Their bodies lay shattered on the rocks, a gruesome tableau intended to instill fear and obedience. Missionary letters and martyr accounts, such as those from the London Missionary Society, described the courage of the victims and the horror of the scene. The public executions ordered by Queen Ranavalona I served their purpose to solidify her power and to eradicate foreign influence. The immediate aftermath was a period of intense suppression of Christianity, driving the faith underground for decades. The spectacle of these deaths, particularly the mass executions at Ferravohitra, left an indelible mark on Malagasy history. Ranavalona I's reign was one of extreme cruelty and isolation, but also of remarkable political independence, maintained through methods that shocked both her subjects and the European powers, who watched from afar. The memory of the Christian martyrs became a powerful symbol of faith and resistance against tyranny. Number 4. The beheading of Lady Jane Grey by Mary I of England. The winter of 1554 saw London gripped by a stark and sorrowful spectacle: the public execution of Lady Jane Grey. Barely 17 years old, Jane had reigned as Queen of England for just 9 days, a pawn in a brutal game of thrones orchestrated by ambitious men. Her tragic end was ordered by Mary I, the rightful heir and daughter of Henry VIII, a queen determined to reclaim her throne and restore the Catholic faith to England. Jane was a Protestant, a great-niece of Henry VIII, and had been proclaimed queen by her father-in-law, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, in a desperate attempt to prevent Mary's Catholic succession following the death of the young Protestant King Edward VI. For Mary, Jane represented a dangerous threat to her legitimate claim to the throne and a symbol of the Protestant heresy that had taken root in England. While Jane herself was an unwilling participant in the plot, her claim to the throne, however brief and manipulated, could not be tolerated. Mary, after consolidating her power, had initially shown some leniency, postponing Jane's execution. However, the Wyatt Rebellion in early 1554, a Protestant uprising aimed at deposing Mary and placing Jane back on the throne, sealed Jane's fate. Even though Jane was imprisoned and had no involvement in the rebellion, her continued existence even as a prisoner posed too great a risk to Mary's newly secured reign. The Queen's Council, and Mary herself, now saw her execution as a political necessity. Records from the Chronicle of Queen Jane and 2 years of Queen Mary confirm the sequence of events. The execution was to take place on Tower Hill, the traditional site for public executions of traitors. However, due to Jane's youth and the widespread sympathy she garnered, Mary ordered that her execution be carried out privately within the confines of the Tower of London, a concession to preserve some semblance of dignity and avoid an overtly rebellious public reaction. Nevertheless, it was a public execution in the sense that it was witnessed by officials, soldiers, and a limited but significant number of spectators permitted access to Tower Green. The details quickly spread throughout the city, making it a powerful and shocking event in the public consciousness. On the morning of February 12, 1554, the Tower of London was a place of grim activity. Jane's husband, Lord Guilford Dudley, was executed on Tower Hill earlier that day, a final cruel blow for the young queen. Jane, dressed simply in a black gown, was led from her lodging to the scaffold erected on Tower Green. The weather was cold and bleak. As she walked, she carried a book of prayers. Her demeanor was calm and composed, showing remarkable courage for someone so young facing such a terrifying end. She passed the cart carrying her husband's body back from Tower Hill, a sight that must have been heartbreaking, yet she reportedly remained steadfast. Witnesses included the constable of the Tower, Sir John Bridges, and a handful of select spectators. The atmosphere was one of solemnity, mixed with a palpable sense of tragedy. Upon reaching the scaffold, Jane made a short speech, admitting that she was guilty of usurping the throne, but insisting that her heart was innocent of any intent to harm the Queen. She publicly declared her faith as a Protestant, acknowledging her sin in having signed the document that proclaimed her Queen. She then recited Psalm 51, a prayer of penitence. She asked the bystanders to pray for her. Her chaplain, Master Feckenham, the Catholic Dean of St. Paul's, had tried to convert her in her final hours, but she had respectfully refused. She then bound her own eyes with a handkerchief, and feeling for the block with her hands, laid her head down. Historical accounts, including those from the Venetian ambassador at the time, describe her remarkable fortitude. The executioner, a professional, accustomed to his grim duty, waited for her signal with a final, simple phrase, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Lady Jane Grey stretched out her body. The axe fell, and her head was severed with a single swift blow. The public reaction to Jane's execution was one of deep sorrow and pity. While Mary had succeeded in removing a political threat, the image of the young innocent Queen being sent to the block resonated widely. Her death became a powerful symbol of Protestant martyrdom and the ruthlessness of Mary's reign. The execution ordered by Queen Mary I marked a dark chapter in English history, highlighting the brutal realities of power and succession in Tudor England. Number 3. The beheading of Eurydice and her child by Olympias of Macedon. In the turbulent aftermath of Alexander the Great's death, in 323 BCE, his vast empire became a battleground for his ambitious generals and family members. At the heart of this bloody struggle for succession was Olympias, Alexander's fierce and formidable mother. Olympias was a woman of immense pride and a terrifyingly ruthless disposition, absolutely devoted to maintaining the legacy and authority of her son's royal line. Her primary rival was Eurydice, the young wife of Philip III Arrhidaeus, Alexander's half-brother, who had been proclaimed king following Alexander's death. Eurydice was not content to be a mere figurehead. She was ambitious, intelligent, and sought to gain real power through her husband, actively participating in political maneuvering and military campaigns. Olympia saw Eurydice as a direct threat to the claims of her grandson Alexander IV, the infant son of Alexander the Great, and Roxane. For Olympias, Eurydice represented a challenge to the purest line of succession and, more importantly, a potential obstacle to her own ambition to rule as regent. After years of simmering tension and political infighting between the various generals and factions, Olympias finally returned to Macedon in 317 BC. With an army determined to assert her authority, she quickly gained control of the kingdom, and her first priority was to eliminate her rivals. Her return was marked by a wave of retribution against those who had opposed her in Alexander's lineage. Ancient historians like Diodorus Siculus, in his Bibliotheca Historica, detail Olympias's bloody revenge. Among her first victims was Philip III, Arrhidaeus, and his wife Eurydice. Olympias had Philip executed almost immediately. For Eurydice, Olympias reserved a more personal and cruel fate. Eurydice was not just a political rival, but a young woman who had dared to challenge Olympias's authority and prominence within the Macedonian royal house. Olympias ordered her imprisonment, followed by a public execution designed to instill terror and demonstrate Olympias's absolute power to all who might oppose her. She wanted to make an example of Eurydice, not just for her own sake, but for all future rivals. The execution took place in Amphipolis, a significant city in Macedon. While the exact location of the public spectacle is not always clear in ancient texts, the event was well known and served as a chilling warning to the court and the populace. Olympias reportedly sent an axe, a rope, and a cup of hemlock to Eurydice, allowing her to choose her method of death, a sadistic gesture of mercy. Eurydice, still defiant even in captivity, reportedly chose the rope, refusing the humiliation of the other auctions. The manner of her death, though not a drawn-out public spectacle in the style of later eras, was intended to be a public demonstration of Olympias's final victory over her rival. It became known throughout the Hellenistic world, a grim testament to Olympias's ruthlessness. However, Olympias's brutality did not end there. Driven by vengeance and a desire to utterly eradicate any potential threat, she also ordered the public execution of Eurydice's infant child, whom she had borne to Philip III Archidaeus. The murder of the child, a young innocent royal, was an act of extreme cruelty, meant to ensure that no possible claim to the throne could ever emerge from Eurydice's lineage. This act, alongside Eurydice's death, cemented Olympias's reputation for savage vindictiveness. The immediate aftermath was a court cowed into submission and a period of bloody purges by Olympias, who executed hundreds of her political enemies. The news of Eurydice's death, along with that of her child, sent a clear message across the empire. Olympias was a force to be reckoned with, and no one was safe if they stood in her way. Her brief but brutal reign in Macedon was ultimately ended by her own execution the following year, but the shocking public executions she ordered, particularly that of Eurydice and her child, remained a chilling testament to the extreme measures taken in the power struggles. Number 2. The public burnings during the Spanish Inquisition, ordered by Isabella I of Castile. The late 15th century in Spain was a period of fervent religious zealotry and the consolidation of royal power under the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. While Isabella did not personally order the execution of specific individuals by name for heresy, her decisive action in establishing and fiercely supporting the Spanish. For Isabella, a devout Catholic, the purity of faith within her kingdom was paramount. She believed that religious unity was essential for political stability and divine favor. Primary targets were conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, and Moriscos, Muslims who had converted, many of whom were suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. Isabella and Ferdinand sought and received a papal bull from Pope Sixtus IV in 1478, which granted them the authority to establish the Inquisition in their domains. This was not merely a religious endeavor, it was a powerful tool for social and political control, allowing the crown to root out dissent, seize property, and consolidate authority. Queen Isabella was the driving force behind its establishment and ensured its ruthless implementation. Her determination to purify Spain of heresy led her to appoint the infamous Tomás de Torquemada as the first Inquisitor General in 1483. Compendium of the Spanish Inquisition by Henry Charles Lee, though dated, provides extensive documentation of its practices and the royal support it received. The Inquisition operated with extreme secrecy in its investigations, but its judgments culminated in grand public spectacles designed to terrify and reinforce religious orthodoxy. These were the auto da fe. They were not mere executions. They were elaborate religious ceremonies and civic events, eagerly anticipated by the populace. They combined a solemn procession, a mass, a public reading of sentences, and ultimately the punishment of the condemned. The condemned were often paraded through the streets wearing a San Benito, a penitential garment, and a conical hat, known as a carroza, marking them as heretics. The most shocking and endearing image of the Inquisition's public executions was the burning at the stake. While the Inquisition itself did not perform the burnings, it handed over the relapsed heretics to the secular authorities for execution, the condemned were brought to the cremavero, burning place, directly from the auto da fe ceremony. The atmosphere was one of fervent piety, mixed with morbid curiosity. Crowds would gather in the thousands from all social strata to witness these acts of faith. Air would be thick with the smell of smoke and the shouts of the crowd. These were not quick private affairs, but prolonged, agonizing spectacles intended to purify the land through fire and instill overwhelming fear. Records from the Archivo General de Simancas contain numerous accounts of these public events. The exact number of people burned during Isabella's reign is debated by historians, but estimates range from a few thousand to tens of thousands. Each burning was a terrifying public event. The condemned would be tied to a stake, often surrounded by faggots. Priests would be present urging final confessions. For those who refused to recant or were deemed unrepentant, the flames would consume them. It was a slow, agonizing death, a public display of the ultimate penalty for religious deviation. The scene was meant to be a visceral lesson in obedience and orthodoxy, ensuring that heresy would not take root. The immediate aftermath of an auto da fe was a profound sense of spiritual purification, for the faithful and deep-seated fear for anyone who might harbor doubts or secrets. The properties of the condemned were confiscated further, enriching the crown and solidifying the Inquisition's financial independence. Queen Isabella, by initiating and steadfastly supporting the Spanish Inquisition, played a pivotal role in creating a climate of religious terror and conformity that endured for centuries. The public burnings, though carried out by secular authorities, were a direct consequence of her zealous policies and her ultimate royal command, leaving an indelible, shocking mark on Spanish history. Number 1. The beheading of the 6 gentlemen of the Wuxu reform by Empress Dowager Cixi of China. In the late 19th century, as the mighty Tang dynasty faced increasing pressure from Western imperial powers and internal decay, a movement for radical reform emerged. At the heart of this reform movement was the young Guangxu emperor, who sought to modernize China's political, educational, and military systems. Standing against him, however, was his powerful and conservative aunt, Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi had held de facto power for decades, ruling behind the scenes through her control of the court and her influence over successive emperors. She was a shrewd and ruthless politician, deeply suspicious of anything that might undermine her authority or challenge the traditional Thin system. The 100 Days Reform of 1898 was a whirlwind of radical decrees issued by the Guangxu Emperor, aimed at rapidly transforming China. These reforms threatened the entrenched interests of the conservative officials and, crucially, Empress Dowager Cixi's own power base. Cixi, watching from the sidelines, perceived the reforms as an existential threat to her authority and the very foundations of the Adam's state as she understood it. She believed the reforms were too fast, too radical, and would lead to chaos. When the emperor and his reformist advisors, particularly Kang Yue and Liang Qichao, attempted to sideline Cixi and even considered a coup to remove her, she moved decisively. According to historical records, including those in the secret memoirs of the Court of Peking by J.O. Pland and Ibachhaus, Cixi's fury and determination were absolute. On September 21, 1898, Empress Dowager Cixi launched a counter-coup. She swiftly arrested the Guangxu Emperor, placing him under house arrest, effectively ending the 100 Days' reform. Her next step was to punish the reformers and send an undeniable message to anyone who dared to challenge her authority. While Kang Yue and Liang Qichao managed to escape with foreign assistance, 6 other prominent reformers, including Tan Sitonglin's News, Yang Shenxiu, Yang Rui, Liu Guangdi, and Kang Guangren, Kang Yue's younger brother, were captured. These men became known as the 6 Gentlemen of the Wuxu Reform. Cixi personally ordered their immediate arrest and swift public execution. She aimed to make a terrifying example of them, ensuring no future challenges to her power would arise. The executions were to be carried out publicly at Keishiku, the vegetable market execution ground, a notorious site in Beijing known for its public beheadings. On September 28, 1898, a large crowd gathered at Keishiku, eager to witness the grim spectacle. The atmosphere was a mix of morbid curiosity, fear, and perhaps some sympathy for the condemned. The 6 reformers were brought to the execution ground, bound and paraded through the streets, a common practice to humiliate condemned criminals before their final moments. They were led to the center of the square where the executioners waited with their broadswords. Contemporary accounts, including eyewitness testimonies later recorded by missionaries and foreign diplomats, described the scene. Each of the 6 gentlemen reportedly met his fate with dignity and defiance. Tan Sitong, one of the most prominent among them, famously declared, "I die happily for the sake of the reforms. I wish only that there were more people to follow my example." He reportedly walked to the execution ground, calmly accepting his fate as a sacrifice for China's future. The public nature of the execution was critical. With a swing of the executioner's sword, each man was beheaded. The heads were then often displayed as a warning. The sight of these prominent scholars and officials losing their lives in such a brutal and public manner sent a chilling message throughout the empire. The immediate aftermath of the execution of the 6 gentlemen was a tightening of Cixi's grip on power and a severe repression of reformist ideas. The Guangxu emperor remained a powerless figurehead until his death, a decade later, widely believed to have been poisoned on Cixi's orders. The executions effectively stifled any further attempts at top-down reform for many years. Empress Dowager Cixi's order for the public execution of the 6 gentlemen was a pivotal moment in late Amsum history, a shocking display of her absolute power and her determination to preserve traditional order at any cost. It cemented her image as a formidable and ruthless ruler, a queen who would stop at nothing to maintain her grip on the dragon throne.